Welcome, Cece. Thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you for having me back. I appreciate that we began a discussion back in June about the issues surrounding wireless technology for safety. And I would like to spend just a moment or two doing a quick recap of what we discussed back in June. And that was that 3 years ago I learned that there could be biological harm from electromagnetic radiation emitted by today's wireless technologies, including cellular technology and all of our routers, access points, and devices. So when we look at the electromagnetic radiation spectrum, we see that microwave radiation encompasses not just microwave ovens, but radar, cell phones, wireless technologies, utility smart meters, and other personal devices like baby monitors, laptops, iPads, wearables. So this, unfortunately, has never been safety tested, and our country has been very quick to adopt this technology. When I brought this up to the Ashland Public Schools, they began to do their own investigative research into this. And one of the key documents that was discovered was something called the Bioinitiative Report. And it has looked at scientific studies, peer-reviewed published studies from the 50s all the way up through 2012. And the key scientific evidence included damage to sperm and reproduction, the fact that children are more vulnerable because their systems are still developing, fetal and neonatal effects, autism, electrohypersensitivity, blood-brain barrier compromise, genotoxicity, neurotoxicity, and a lot of the cancers that we have heard a little bit about in the media. So when our school committee looked at that, there was also another body of evidence, primarily funded by the industry, that shows no evidence of harm. So they were caught between a rock and a hard place. When they read the fine print, however, that comes with every one of our devices, it says in the very fine print, if you happen to have an Apple device, you could go into Settings, General, About, Legal, and you will find a passage called RF exposure, which is radio frequency radiation or microwave radiation. So when our school committee looked at this, and all of these warnings say, do not keep this on your body or you may exceed the FCC's allowable radiation limits for public exposure. So they thought, why wouldn't we do at least what the manufacturers are telling us to do in the absence of a higher authority here in our own town or in our own state? So what Ashland Public Schools did is came up with what they call best practices for mobile devices, and we have a sign laminated and hanging in all of our school classrooms. And it says to turn off the device when in use. So all of the laptops, all of the tablets, all of the minis, all of the smart boards, they should all be turned off unless they're in use, because otherwise they beacon for a signal all the time. They're looking for a handshake with the devices. So turn off the devices, but also turn off the Wi-Fi. So if we're not actively needing to use Wi-Fi, turn it off. Otherwise, it's continually beaconing to find a handshake with those devices. And always place the mobile device on a solid surface, preferably one that's not metal, because metal amplifies radiation. And then to keep a distance back, even if the digital pulse is not going on, you still don't want to be in that electromagnetic field because it's still stronger than what our own biological electromagnetic field is. So Ashland put that into place, and then I met with Senator Karen Spilka, and I measured the amount of radiation coming from her cell phone and her district director's laptop, and both of those went off the charts with a microwave detection meter that I have. And so Senator Spilka was gracious to appoint resources in her office to craft a bill called Senate 1222. It's an act creating a special commission to study the health impacts of electromagnetic fields. The House of Representatives gave it the nod. It was assigned to the Joint Committee on Public Health. Public testimony was taken, and testimony was sent in from across the country and from scientists around the world, as well as from medical doctors and people who suffer from electrohypersensitivity. So this bill was voted out favorably by the Joint Committee on Public Health. Senator Spilka will be reintroducing it again this next session under her own name, which is really gracious of her to do.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Could you just repeat that last sentence? It was voted out?
It was voted out favorably by the
okay.
Joint Committee on Public Health, but there was only a 3-week turnaround between the Joint Committee on Healthcare Finance had to report out, and at that stage of the process, they bundle hundreds and hundreds of bills into lots, and the lot that this bill was assigned to did not get voted out favorably this time. But I understand that's not uncommon for the first time a bill is introduced.
Process.
So since that time, a report called Captured Agency was published by Harvard Law School Center for Ethics, and the subtitle is How the FCC is Dominated by the Industries It Presumably Regulates. This is just the cover, but the 59-page report goes into detail about how the FCC is run by folks from the industry who are putting their corporate profits above public health. And as some of you may recall, back in the 90s when the first oncologist said my cancer just died of these odd brain tumors on the side of her brain, normally they would come in from the middle of the brain, these tumors on the side of the brain align directly with the antennas of the patient's cell phone. The CTIA, or the Cellular Telecommunications or Telephone Industry Association, commissioned a big study to be done because they had the funds and offered to do that. When the study was complete, Dr. George Carlo reported that yes, indeed, this could be carcinogenic, and he was dismissed. His findings were never reported to the public. The gentleman who did that study, who hired the scientist to do it, was Tom Wheeler of the CTIA. Today, Tom Wheeler is the head of the FCC. So we need to be very careful on what we lean to as resources of credible science, because there are many, many industry-funded studies that are done to discount the ones that show evidence of harm. And it's not take one, give one. If there's evidence of harm, that stands. So there was also another important finding in this last year. This comes from the IEEE Power Electronics magazine. So the IEEE was actually one of the bodies that informed the FCC standards back in the 1990s. And they only based those standards on the thermal effect. So how much heat does it take to raise the temperature of skin in order to have any kind of harmful effect? Well, there are thousands of studies that show clear biological harm at the non-thermal level. And so now even the IEEE, which helped to set those thermal-based standards, are acknowledging in this article some effects of weak magnetic fields on biological systems. Radio frequency fields can change radical concentrations and cancer cell growth rates. So they're talking about non-thermal, non-ionizing, low-level microwave radiation. It does have biological effects. And this spring, also, I mentioned last time, there was a very significant study done by the U.S. National Toxicology Program. They went in expecting to find that there was no harm from cell phones. And in this $25 million multi-year study, they began to do their first reportings, and what they found is DNA damage and heart tumors and brain tumors in these rats that are selected, because what happens with these Sprague Dawley rats tend to happen with humans. And this study also supported what we have learned epidemiologically about trends in cancer development around microwave radiation. So in my last discussion here, I indicated they were preliminary findings, but I was incorrect. They're actually partial findings. They have been peer-reviewed, and they are standing. Over the next months, as we go into 2017, they will be issuing additional findings as they go through the rest of the studies that they're conducting. So one thing that happens quite often is anytime something gets out into the public space about biological harm, the industry tends to put some spin on it. So Dr. Joel Moskowitz, who is the director at the Center for Family and Community Health in the School of Public Health at the University of California, Berkeley, has put out a one-page sheet with some really good links into it that help to dispel any confusing information that might be put out through the media. So where that brings us is to start talking about solutions. So thank you for allowing me to do that recap. And I think when we look at solutions, we need to look at them from a town perspective in several areas. One is the schools, and I'm very proud of Ashland Public Schools for those best practices. We had a panel of world experts come here last summer in 2015 and congratulated us for being the very first public school district in the United States to start taking precautionary measures around wireless radiation. And so what we have here is the international appeal. This is the world scientists. More than 220 scientists have gotten together and signed this appeal that they sent to the World Health Organization and the United Nations, all of the United Nations member states, to say, we have gone beyond the point of concern. We now have a near epidemic situation about to hit our public health space. Dr. Martin Blank of Columbia University did a 3-minute introduction and a video online to this, and I'll provide the link after the meeting. But they recognized that all of this technology was rolled out before it was tested, and we have rapidly adopted it, especially in this country. Other countries are taking more precautionary approaches. But it's a very simple appeal, 2 pages, and in it they say, we need to protect children and pregnant women. We need to fix our guidelines and standards to strengthen them so that our standards meet today's science. They're about 20 years out of date right now. Manufacturers need to be encouraged to develop safer technology, and one of the world experts that came here to speak was former Microsoft Canada president, Frank Clegg. And when he retired from Microsoft Canada, he went out and spoke to a dozen of the top scientists all over the world who specialize in microwave radiation. And he came back and said, our standards in North America are not safe. And he is busy up with Parliament right now in Canada. He's a few steps ahead of us. And he has founded Canadians for Safe Technology so that his country has a forum to address this in as well. Our utility companies need to respond responsibly in how we're utilizing our generation of power, and the public needs to be fully informed about the risks and taught harm reduction strategies. Our medical professionals need to be trained so that they can recognize symptoms of electrohypersensitivity and perhaps infertility or behavior issues, cognitive issues, Alzheimer's, autism. All of that our medical practitioners have not yet been trained on to screen for harm from electromagnetic radiation. Our government should provide training and research on electromagnetic fields separate from what the industry is doing. Our media experts should disclose any financial relationships that they have with the industry, because right now we don't get true investigative journalism on this topic because the folks who benefit from marketing these products are also the same lobbyists in DC who are also the same folks buying up the majority of media content here in the United States. So we actually don't get much investigative journalism on this. And then we should also create white zones where there are no electromagnetic radiation fields so that people who become sick when exposed to this can get out to access their doctors, to access the grocery store, to go on vacation, and be able to stay in a hotel room. I know when my daughter was on a program over in France, you don't get Wi-Fi in all your rooms because they know better there. You may have one area designated in the hotel where you can go down and link into Wi-Fi, but they don't have all Wi-Fi all the time in many other countries. So, Mr. Featherston, at our earlier meeting, I had indicated that the Southborough Board of Health wrote a letter to their public school district saying that this is something that the schools should become educated on. If you would like to move forward with that, I think our school committee would benefit from hearing from the Board of Health that this is something that is important to pay attention to in our schools. In our public buildings, we should take a look around and see what we have adopted for Wi-Fi and maybe reassess that and say, can we do without emitting microwave radiation? Can we use our hardwired resources? That would be the safest way to protect our employees who have to stay in these buildings for their 40-hour work week. With regard to cell towers and other devices that are somewhat imposed upon us in our towns, Mr. Oram was kind enough to talk me through the Telecommunications Act of 1996. And in that, the industry was effectively putting in a clause that says if anybody claims biological or environmental harm, you can't come back and claim damages. I've heard from somebody recently that that is true environmentally, but for human health, I don't think that's what that might actually say, so we might want to take another look through that. And when I met with the town manager, he suggested that one thing we could do is take a look at our leases and see when our cell tower licensing permits come up again, and maybe think twice about allowing so many companies to put so many antennas in one spot. In some countries, they say you can have this tower, you can have this tower, but not have all the vendors all on one site, at every site, that's just bombarding the public. So there are smarter ways we can learn to use our technology. When that National Toxicology Program report came out, it was reported out to the FDA, which commissioned the study with the National Toxicology Program. It was reported out to the FCC, and it was reported out to the public. Within weeks of that being reported out, Tom Wheeler held a press conference and he pushed forward 5G. So the technology that we all use with our smartphones today runs off of 3rd generation and 4th generation. With 5G, it's not going to go through walls and buildings and ceilings as fast as it does with 3G and 4G. So those two technologies will remain, but on top of that, 5G will speed up things a lot faster. But because they're going up at a higher spectrum, it's not going to go through the buildings like it does now. So what they're going to be coming to our town to try and do is to put those new cell, let me just take a quick peek, small cell sites. They're going to try and put those all over our town. I'm hearing that it might be like every 12 houses or every 2 acres. And those will sit there and constantly emit microwave radiation. So when they come and try and be very persuasive and offer us incentives to install these towers, I hope that we will look at it through the lens of public health before we look at it through whatever profits we might reap from that. So in addition to that, I know that our town is in some process of adopting smart utility meters. That might impact gas, it might impact electrical, it might impact water meters. And we want to be very judicious and learn as much as we can about each separate kind of meter. I've heard some emit more radiation than others, so we'll want to be very informed about what we're opting in for. And then I hope we will, if we can, say, industry, you need to go back and make technology that's actually safe. That would be our first best recourse, because then we wouldn't have microwave radiation exposure. So if we can use our voice as a municipal board, that would be very helpful. And then look at each device and see how much radiation is it emitting. And give people the option to keep their analog meters, because those meters are purely mechanical. They don't emit any microwave radiation, and that is safest for our citizens. In our homes,
Cece?
yeah.
I hate to do this to you, but we've got a very aggressive agenda tonight. Can I get you to wrap up in about 3 minutes?
Sure, that's perfect.
Thank you.
In our homes, there are very simple choices we can make to reduce our own personal microwave radiation exposure. WACA-TV was kind enough to come to my house, where we took the meter and walked around and looked at all the exposures I had for my family and offer suggestions for what you can do differently. With gratitude to our selectmen and the Ashland Public Library, we have received a grant to put an acoustimeter on loan in the Ashland Public Library. It's very simple. You turn it on. If there's microwave radiation in the area, it will go into the red zone for where we know there's great biological harm. When it goes into the yellow zone, that's where people who feel the symptoms begin to feel electrohypersensitive, and anything down at the bottom where it's green indicates that that's still below the level where today we know there's biological harm. So this is a terrific resource in the community. Anybody can take it out for a week and share it among your friends, your families, your neighbors, and then make the choices that you might like to protect your family. So I mentioned last time that other towns are also joining the conversation. I spoke of Natick and Framingham and Dover-Sherborne. Since then, Pepperell, a father out there, found me and asked me to come, and we've spoken with their school board. We met with the chairwoman, we met with the superintendent and the IT director. They now have it on as a meeting agenda item for next week. Following that, the gentleman who brought me in had a meeting with the Department of Public Health in Pepperell. They would like us to come back and speak to a larger audience to start educating their population as well. Last Friday, a mom had sought me out, and she's from Medway, and we went and met with the superintendent and the director of wellness in Medway. And last night, the folks in Worcester, for their school committee, asked me to come in, and I did a presentation there as well. So there are a lot of communities who are finding this and learning about it and wanting to protect their citizens from it. So if I could leave you with a couple of requests, one would be to send a letter to the Ashland Public School Committee. The next would be to perhaps reach out to Dr. Bob Knorr at the Department of Public Health and the Environmental Bureau. He has been very engaged in this ever since that panel of world experts came and spoke to the legislature. They held a private meeting with him and his staff, and he is now looking at putting resources toward informing the public on this. So we may have perhaps an EMF fact sheet coming out in the future, and that would be something that we could turn around and distribute to our community so people can understand what this issue is and how to protect themselves. I would also recommend that you reach out to the Department of Public Utilities, because right now we have a smart grid pilot program rolling out in Worcester that has cost overruns that they're trying to get the taxpayers to pay for another 2-year extension on that pilot. And we now know, especially with that NTP study, that they are putting biologically harmful devices on those poor folks' homes in Worcester. And we need to start taking care of our citizens and educating and giving people the right to know and a right to choose if and how they want to deploy their technology. A couple of resources that are available. This is a children's book. It was written by an author in Australia who is a former teacher, and she also worked with their telecommunications commissions there. Wireless Wise Kids. It takes children and adults through in a very easy way to learn about this issue. In addition to the biological harm, there's digital addiction that's taking place. Dr. Victoria Dunkley has written a book called Reset Your Child's Brain. She's a child psychologist, and she uses this protocol in her practice. I think we can all feel when our kids are getting a little too far down the rabbit hole, and this is a really healthy way to help your child detox from that. Katherine Steiner, Adair, wrote The Big Disconnect. She was one of the experts that came to Massachusetts. She's actually from Newton. To tell us that all this Wi-Fi all the time and this excessive screen time is very damaging to the way our children's brains are supposed to be developing, and they're not, in many cases, developing properly with excessive screen time. So wonderful resources out there. I have a research repository called Understanding EMFs out on the Google research, or on the Google sites. And there's also a company in the UK that has worked with a scientist in Finland who specializes in electromagnetic radiation. And they have realized that education is going to be pivotal in helping our society to cope with all this new technology. And so they have come online with 40-minute e-learning courses that you can take for less than the cost of a movie ticket, get a good scientific, medical-based education, and it kicks out a tip sheet so you can hang it at home and know what to do. So I'd like to give each of you.
Just because I'm going to have to hold you to a time commitment.
Yeah.
Can you send us all of the studies that you sent tonight? I know it's
Absolutely.
probably an arduous thing, but you know.
No, I've got them all.
Can you send so
sure.
we can do that? And then just one other thing before we get to our other hearing. Last meeting, Cece did ask if the board wanted to write a letter. Do we want to open that up for discussion tonight, or do we want to think about it in another meeting? Or?
Question is, the school is already doing what they have done. Would this add more
Well,
value?
they have these signs posted, but they haven't actually come up with a way to turn the Wi-Fi off. So we have a policy in place, but not a procedure to fulfill the policy.
Do we have an oversight with the school?
We have an oversight over of all public health.
Yeah.
Public health, so yes.
Yeah. So
I thought that school is a little bit independent of it. We couldn't oversee that. That's what I felt when I had asked some question about the bathroom issues last year. They were.
Well, if it comes to public health, I would agree
I
with
mean,
you
of
that we
course,
do
the-
have a.
The
we do have
bathroom
a-
issue was a public issue. it didn't go through, so I thought that was separate entity where we should not supposed to touch it.
Well, if we're not protecting our youth, shame on
Okay.
us, is what I would think. I would be comfortable in revisiting at our next meeting after I see all of the data that you
Sure.
presented tonight. I mean, I'm just speaking for myself. I mean, for the rest of
I
it, it's
understand, but
data.
whatever she gives it in the
Right.
electronic mail, as well as whatever that she wants us to put it in writing, so that we can mull over it and then
We will
work on
put it as a topic of discussion at our
Okay.
next meeting.
Thank you.
Mr.
But
Chair,
if
if
I
we
may,
could.
Yep.
leave these with you.
Sure.
Well,
Go ahead,
she's
Mark.
handing those out, just if we could get the letter from Southborough, so we can see what they
Sure.
Yes.
wrote.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
would be good.
I
too.
can send that as well.
That would be great, thank you. Cece, as always, a great presentation. You were
Thank you very
a great
much.
presenter, that's for sure. Thank you. It's nice to see somebody so passionate, too. Yeah.
Oh, if I can just show, this is what it takes to hardwire a device. This is for an Apple product. You've got a camera adapter here plugged into a lightning adapter that has the plug for an Ethernet cable. I actually bought this to see if I could hardwire my daughter's cell phone because she's in high school and she sits there and does homework for 3 hours a night, and the kids collaborate through their cell phones. And so we plugged this in to her cell phone, and I said, you know, does it work? And she said, yeah. And I said, try and do something. Tell me how the speed is. You get such a faster connection when you're
Wow.
hardwired. It's a lot safer, it's a lot faster, and it's a lot more reliable and more secure. So this is the solution in our schools. You just hook up the laptops, the iPads, the tablets, the minis to this. And there may even be cases where you don't even need to be hardwired. You can just use the tablet in dummy mode and use the apps on it if you don't actually have to access the internet, so.
You know, you just got my kids in trouble, right? You're doing
Yeah.
3 hours of homework. Thanks. Thank you very much.